Welcome, weary traveler of the night, to another quiet voyage through the corridors of history. It was the year 1351 when a strange, weather-worn map surfaced, cryptic, uncomfortable, and impossibly incorrect. Drawn in a Templar hand, it charted lands far west of the known world, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, beyond logic, beyond anything medieval Europe should have known. It showed islands no explorer had ever reached, coastlines that wouldn't be officially discovered for another century, and a large, circular landmass, symmetrical, precise, and now long swallowed by the sea. The name written beside it wasn't Atlantis, yet the implication hung in the air like a whisper. Had the Templars mapped a world no one else knew existed? And if they had, did they see it themselves? Breathe slowly and let the idea settle. Because tonight, we are not just chasing a legend. We are chasing those who may have believed it, acted on it, and perhaps disappeared because of it. The Knights Templar you know, warrior monks, holy bankers, keepers of secrets, condemned as heretics, and folded into myth. But beneath the dramatic trials and treasure tales lies something quieter and far stranger. A trail of maritime symbols, a missing fleet, and a handful of discoveries too early and too deliberate to ignore. Put together, they suggest a mission not east toward Jerusalem, but west into the mists, toward a land erased from maps and memory. What if the Templars didn't simply vanish under persecution? What if some escaped, intentionally, on a final voyage in search of a mythical island said to hold both the origins of civilization and the warning of its downfall? What if Atlantis wasn't just a parable, but a destination? Tonight, we follow the faint breadcrumbs, ruined castles, sealed archives, obscure testimonies, and maps drawn by hands that should not have known what they knew. We cannot promise answers, but the clues, real, documented, unsettling, are far stranger than fiction. And whatever truth remains waits just beneath the surface. Before we drift deeper into these shadows, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss a secret history tried so carefully to bury. Our journey begins at the port of La Rochelle in 1307, once the beating heart of Templar naval power. The Atlantic wind carried salt and rumor through wooden docks, where ships rocked gently in the tide. Lanterns flickered. Clerks tallied crates beneath the steady gaze of knights cloaked in white and red. It was the eve of the Templar downfall, though no one yet knew it, or perhaps someone did. Within days, King Philip IV would unleash a coordinated purge, wealth seized, brothers arrested, tortured, and forced to confess to sins both real and invented. Yet one piece of the operation failed. A portion of the Templar fleet, by some counts nearly 20 ships, simply vanished. Not sunk, not captured, not burned. Gone. As if someone had anticipated the storm and planned a final voyage. Official records fall silent here. No lists, no logs. But stories survived. Portuguese sailors whispered of nights boarding ships under moonless skies. North African merchants spoke of Western vessels appearing and disappearing without trade. On Madeira, legends linger of foreign builders who arrived with crosses and constructed with uncanny precision. And remember, La Rochelle faced west, not toward Rome or the Holy Land, but toward the unknown. If you believed a mythical island lay beyond the Atlantic, this would be your launch point. Some historians claim the fleet fled to Scotland or Genoa, but none of those explanations account for ship sightings far beyond the Azores, or for carvings found on islands Europe supposedly hadn't reached. more mysteries deepen with a coded Latin fragment attributed to a Templar commander named Jacques de Montbard, discovered in the early 1900s. It speaks softly of a last journey, not east, but beneath the setting star, to where the old kings drowned. Some say it's metaphor, some say grief, but a handful take it literally, a final voyage west toward drowned kings. And suddenly, the trail meets an older legend, Atlantis. Plato placed the lost civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, deep in the Atlantic, destroyed in a single day and night. What if the Templars believed it wasn't myth, but memory, preserved through esoteric teachings, ancient texts, and knowledge filtered from Islamic scholars? A radiant civilization punished for its arrogance, a warning left in symbols and geometry, a mystery that the Templars, masters of secret knowledge, could not ignore. If they found even a fragment of it, would they not have sailed? La Rochelle becomes more than just a medieval port. It becomes a fulcrum, a hinge between survival and secrecy. And the vanished Templar fleet is no longer simply missing. It becomes an echo, a silent question mark carved into naval history, one that no historian has ever answered with certainty. Skepticism, of course, is reasonable. Ships vanished often, especially in chaotic years shadowed by purges and political collapse. The Atlantic is vast, merciless, and forgetful. Wooden hulls rot, storms strike without warning, and countless vessels have been swallowed without a trace. But here, the silence is too perfect. No storm recorded, no debris found, no bodies, no logs, no wrecks. Just an absence. And sometimes, silence is more suspicious than noise. If the Templars truly sailed west, where did they go? What did they hope to find? And could that voyage have been part of a plan older than the church, older than the throne, older even than Jerusalem itself? Picture La Rochelle on that final night in 1307. Lanterns are extinguished along the harbor. A single ship drifts out on the tide, its hull groaning softly against the swell. A knight stands at the stern, hood pulled low, not looking back at the city that has doomed his order, but forward, into the black, horizon where myths breathe. You follow that imagined ship into the open Atlantic, its timbers creaking beneath your feet, as if still haunted by the men who may have stood there centuries ago. Ahead lies a narrow strait the ancients called the Pillars of Hercules, what we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar, the jagged gateway between Europe and Africa, where the Mediterranean spills into the endless Atlantic. To pass through it is to leave the world of maps and enter an ocean saturated with myth, fear, and wonder. Medieval sailors dreaded it. Ancient explorers were drawn to it. Greeks, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, all pushed west through that threshold in search of trade, knowledge, or legends. But in the Middle Ages, no group approached this gateway with the same quiet obsession as the Knights Templar. Officially, their mission lay in the east. Yet their naval operations repeatedly focused along the western coasts of Portugal, Galicia, and Brittany, regions thick with Templar commanderies and fortified docks, many facing directly toward the open ocean. Taken alone, each outpost means little, but when plotted together, they form a pattern, one eerily aligned with ancient Greek sea routes and later echoed in Islamic maritime charts. And then comes one of the strangest artifacts, a nautical map rediscovered in a monastery near Salamanca. In its margins is etched a peculiar emblem, Pillars of Hercules not as a boundary, but as a beginning. Beside them, a Templar cross. Beyond them, a dotted arc curving deep into the Atlantic, ending in empty parchment. Yet faded Latin words curl along the edge like a whisper. ubi est via ad regnum submersum. Everywhere there is a path to the sunken kingdom, perhaps poetic, perhaps meaningless, but disturbingly consistent with Plato's ancient claim that Atlantis lay beyond the pillars, larger than Libya and Asia combined, destroyed in a single day and night. Many dismiss his account as allegory, a philosophical story wrapped in pseudo-history. But the Templars were not men who casually dismissed ancient knowledge. They lived at the crossroads of scripture, astronomy, mathematics, forbidden texts, and esoteric teachings. To them, myth was often encoded memory. This is where speculation sharpens. If the Templars believed Atlantis existed beyond the pillars, their west-facing strongholds suddenly make sense. Their investments in advanced shipbuilding gain new weight. Their rumored possession of early Portolan charts, showing Atlantic coastlines supposedly unknown to medieval Europe, becomes less improbable. Some vocal skeptics reject this outright, but fragments recovered from ruined Templar sites in Portugal describe courses charted by stars and tides, and one parchment near Tomar mentions an island of concentric circles far beyond the strait, rising and sinking with the will of God. Interpretations vary wildly. Some say it refers to Ireland, others to Madeira, but those standing on the fringe whisper Atlantis, not the divine utopia of legend, but a memory of catastrophe, a vault of buried knowledge. And then comes the question no one asks loudly. Why would the Templars care? Why chase a legend scorned by theologians? Perhaps because they didn't think it was a legend at all. Perhaps they saw in Atlantis a mirror of their own fate, a brilliant, advanced society destroyed by corruption, fear, and divine wrath. The parallels were too sharp to ignore. A warning, an omen, or perhaps a promise. You imagine again those silent ships slipping out of La Rochelle, hugging the coast, waiting for the right winds, then daring the crossing. Did they sail straight through the pillars, guided by star charts borrowed from Arab astronomers? Did they believe that past the end of the world, there was something worth finding, or something worth escaping? Even now, the Atlantic guards its secrets well. Sonar scans have revealed strange anomalies, rectangular shapes, unnaturally straight lines, structures dismissed by experts with a shrug. And yet, if you stand on the cliffs of Tarifa and gaze westward into the burning horizon, it's easy to imagine the Templars standing there too. Cloaks snapping in the wind, eyes fixed on the unknown. Not out of madness, but purpose. Perhaps even following a map that should never have existed. It begins, as all great mysteries do, with Plato, the first architect of the Atlantis story. You can almost picture him, quill in hand, eyes narrowed in concentration as he channels the tale through Critias, who heard it from Solon, who supposedly learned it from Egyptian priests. A long chain of ancient storytelling, wrapped in just enough mystique to keep entire civilizations guessing. But when you read the details closely, the description becomes far too specific for a simple allegory. A vast island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, concentric rings of land and water, advanced engineering with hot and cold running channels, a mighty naval force, divine ancestry, and an end brought on not by chance, but by arrogance. The gods, fed up with Atlantean pride, drowned the island in a single day and night of floods and quakes. A perfect myth, or something else. Most scholars insist Plato meant it metaphorically, a lesson about power and corruption. But others have quietly wondered if he was recording something older, a memory, an echo of an event passed down in fragments. And this is where things start to warp. Hidden among lesser-known Templar writings, damaged, smoke-stained, half-burned, you find passages that echo Plato with uncanny precision. One letter, preserved in the Biblioteca Nacional de Portugal, written by a Templar chaplain named Hugo de Tavera, speaks of a land of great order encircled by waves and stone, where the sky was studied and the stars obeyed the priests. It could be metaphor, but the next line is harder to dismiss. The sin of this place was to believe itself above God, and so it was returned to the sea. Suddenly, Plato's divine punishment and the Templars' warning harmonize. Two traditions, centuries apart, describing the same fall. Another fragment, translated from Occitan and kept by a 17th century Jesuit collector, speaks of a paradise swallowed by judgment, whose circles once mirrored heaven. Circles, judgment, paradise lost. Is that Eden, or something far more Atlantic in tone? And then comes a phrase that repeats itself across various Templar marginal notes. Regnum sub aqua, the kingdom beneath the water. Many dismiss it as medieval symbolism, but when those phrases begin appearing alongside navigational marks, routes toward the broken circle, distances measured from the final gate of Hercules, allegory becomes harder to cling to. Some fringe historians argue that the Templars encountered Platonic texts through Arabic translations flourishing in the Islamic world. Baghdad, Damascus, Moorish Spain, all were overflowing with preserved Greek thought. And the Templars, though warriors, were surprisingly literate. They sought knowledge, religious, scientific, esoteric, even dangerous. Which raises a sharp possibility. What if the Templars didn't just read Plato's Atlantis? What if they believed him? Or more provocatively, what if they thought Plato's account was a corrupted echo of an even older truth? A truth that matched teachings whispered by Coptic monks, Persian scholars, or Sufi mystics who passed down forbidden cosmologies no crusader was meant to hear. One thread appears again and again in obscure Templar sermons. The belief that history moves in cycles, that civilizations rise and fall in repeating patterns. As it was in the First Kingdom, so shall it be again, reads one warning, supposedly about Rome. Yet its tone feels older, heavier, as though the First Kingdom referred to something lost long before any empire we can name. Suddenly the echoes grow louder. Plato's structured tale of rise and ruin, the Templars' cryptic warnings of pride and drowning. Two distant voices telling the same story. Whether Atlantis ever existed almost becomes irrelevant. What matters is that someone believed it did, and someone may have gone looking for it. If the Templars thought Atlantis was real, punished, buried, and perhaps still hiding knowledge, they may not have been fleeing persecution at all. They might have been racing toward an ancient truth they weren't meant to uncover. You imagine yourself adrift now in the North Atlantic, somewhere between the jagged cliffs of Portugal and the yawning open sea. Ahead rises a scattered chain of islands, volcanic peaks jutting like sleeping giants from the mist. The Azores, a place of storms, sailors' dreams, and peculiar tales. Shepherds here speak of stone carvings hidden in the hills. Local legends whisper of white-robed men arriving long before any official discovery. And most striking of all, several carved crosses found on basalt cliffs, weathered yet unmistakably shaped like the cross pate of the Templar Order. History insists the Azores were discovered by the Portuguese around 1427. Everything before that, we're told, is error or fantasy. Yet older maps contradict this neat timeline. A 14th century Catalan chart labels an island called Antillia near where the Azores are today. The Dulcet Portolan shows small western land masses marked with cryptic symbols, some Christian, others oddly esoteric. But maps can be debated. Stone cannot. And those crosses on the Azores, cut deep into volcanic rock, should not be there. Not before the Portuguese, not before Columbus, not before any official westward voyage, unless, of course, someone else reached these islands first. Someone with ships, with silence, with secrets, and with a mission shaped by legends of a kingdom beneath the water. A mission the Templars may have carried with them into the Atlantic. Embedded in terrain no 15th century Portuguese explorer could have carved, the stone crosses found in the Azores present a riddle that refuses to fade. Several were discovered already overgrown, half swallowed by the dense, almost jungle-like vegetation that blankets parts of the islands, meaning they had been there long before any documented settlement. One cross in particular, found near Lagoa do Fogo on São Miguel, is set into the foundation of what appears to be a ruined terrace, partially sunken and utterly out of place. This is where opinions fracture sharply. Mainstream historians insist these are post-discovery markers left by missionaries or early settlers. They roll their eyes at any Templar connection. But locals swear the crosses predate all colonial activity, and several early Portuguese accounts describe finding signs of occupation, yet curiously never mention carving any themselves. Adding fuel to the mystery is a now lost account by a Franciscan friar named Estevão Odem, who allegedly wrote of discovering a sanctified stone marked by old Christian hands during an expedition to the Central Islands. The original manuscript vanished from the Lisbon archives in the 1800s, but one line survives in a quoted letter. The sign is the same as worn by those knights who were burned in France. A reference to the Templars, unmistakable and not at all subtle. Skeptics dismiss this as romantic projection, that in our hunger for mysteries we see meaning where none exists. But a thicker question hangs in the air like fog on the water. If these crosses are Templar, what were they doing here? The Azores lie more than 900 miles from Portugal, a daunting voyage even now. In the 14th century, such a crossing required remarkable skill and, more importantly, a compelling reason. One theory suggests the Templars, or their successors, used the Azores as a staging ground, a midpoint sanctuary between Europe and something further west. A place to resupply, regroup, or wait for the right winds. In this interpretation, the crosses are not random markings, but breadcrumbs intentionally left behind. Others propose a stranger idea, that the Azores are the surviving mountaintops of Atlantis itself, what remains above the surface after a cataclysmic collapse. Geology offers little support for this, but the island's volcanic nature and sudden emergence from the sea don't entirely dismiss the notion either. As always, the question becomes less about what is true, and more about what someone believed to be true. The Templars may have seen in the Azores not only land, but legacy. The ragged edges of a forgotten empire, the last visible outposts of something buried deeper than legend. And if they marked it, carved their symbol into its stone bones, perhaps it was their way of saying, "We were here, we saw it, we remembered." And perhaps they hoped someone else would follow. Now imagine unrolling a map onto a flickering wooden table, the parchment edges curled with age, its surface stained by time, weather, and the trembling hands of men who likely died protecting it. At first glance, it looks ordinary. But then your eyes linger on the shorelines. They feel wrong, or rather, too right. Shapes that echo the bulge of South America, curves that resemble the Gulf of Mexico, a swelling on the African coast only confirmed long after the medieval period, you blink. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's cartographic pareidolia, but something about it feels out of time, as though knowledge has slipped through the cracks of history. This is where debates about pre-Columbian maps ignite into flame. Enter the Piri race map of 1513, an Ottoman chart whose creator openly admitted using older, now lost maps. On it appear detailed coastlines of South America and Antarctica, long before European exploration should have known them. Some argue the sources were ancient Phoenician. Others whisper they were Templar. No clear proof exists, but the patterns are hard to ignore. The Templars were infamous for secretive cartography. Their sea charts were private, encoded, written in hybrid scripts, or disguised beneath biblical allegory. And every so often, one of these strange maps emerges from a forgotten monastery shelf, dusty and misclassified. One of the most intriguing surfaced in 1742, uncovered by a Jesuit historian in Avignon. It was labeled as a spiritual diagram, meant to illustrate the path to divine enlightenment. But beneath the metaphors lay a literal, mappable coastline. Once mirrored and corrected, it revealed a landmass beyond the Western Sea, marked with concentric circles. Beside it, the word altar, cut off and incomplete. A clue, a code, or perhaps a forbidden name, partially erased. The idea that the Templars possessed forbidden geography is not as improbable as it sounds. They operated in the Holy Land for nearly 2 centuries, interacting with Arab scholars, Greek monks, and Persian mystics. While Europe struggled through its intellectual stagnation, the East preserved libraries and ancient knowledge. Once exchanged, such knowledge is never fully lost. One Templar manuscript found in the archives of Tomar contains strange measurements, days by sail west from the gates, along with references to stars unfamiliar to medieval European mariners. Some interpret it as mystical symbolism, others as navigational code, and a few ask boldly, what if they truly knew? Here lies the uncomfortable possibility. If the Templars possessed maps showing land masses not officially discovered, it doesn't prove they reached them, but it suggests they tried. It suggests they believed they were sailing towards something real, something remembered. Perhaps not Atlantis in name, but Atlantis in essence. A drowned memory, a forbidden story, a continent lost to time. And to men trained to die for ideas, Jerusalem, salvation, honor, setting sail for a sunken kingdom would have been almost practical. But beneath the scholarly debates lies a deeper, whispered theory that the Templars were not searching for Atlantis. They were returning to it. That the concentric rings, strange measurements and secret charts were remnants of knowledge older than any European chronicle. Atlantean knowledge, passed through esoteric orders like a fading torch. The myth says Atlantis was destroyed for its hubris. Yet what if part of it survived? Physically, symbolically, spiritually. What if the Templars believed they were carrying that legacy? And what if their maps weren't just directions, but invitations? Picture one of those maps folded deep inside a weathered chest, clutched in the gloved hands of a Templar sea captain staring into black ocean night. The waves rise, the stars turn overhead in ancient patterns, and somewhere in that fog-bound distance, beyond time and reason, waits a place that should not exist, and yet refuses to disappear. You're deep beneath the Château de Gisors in the Normandy countryside, where the air tastes of old iron and mildew. Above ground, tourists admire medieval towers and picnic on manicured lawns, blissfully unaware that far below them, in tunnels carved through chalk and shadow, a legend quietly endures. Down here lives the tale of a codex, hidden in stone, wrapped in secrecy, and possibly written by the last Templars who ever walked free. The Codex of Gaisors has never been officially found, which only convinces more people that it must exist. The story says that as the Templar order crumbled in France, a group of knights loyal not to the order's bankers or its warriors, but to its keepers of knowledge, retreated to Gaisors. They carried with them relics, scrolls, and one manuscript said to describe a land of symmetrical harmony. Rivers flowing in concentric rhythm, cities arranged in circles, and a destruction wrought by water and fire. A land unnamed, yet hauntingly familiar. The earliest version of this tale comes from a 17th century account by Rosslyn, a caretaker at Gaisors, who swore he discovered a secret chamber beneath the chapel. Inside, he claimed, were 30 iron coffers and scrolls wrapped in linen. He also said, dramatically, yet persistently, that after informing the authorities, the chamber was sealed, and he was quietly pushed aside. No photos, no access, no official follow-up, just a story that refuses to die. Skeptics dismiss Lenoir as an attention seeker, insisting the Codex is just another treasure legend painted over older myths. Maybe so. But regional documents complicate the dismissal. A recovered set of monastic inventories mentions a book of mirrored lands kept under guard in the 14th century. One entry describes it as being written in alternating hands and alternating tongues, likely Latin, Greek, and perhaps Arabic. Another item simply labels it Templum Terra Secreta, Temple of the Secret Earth. A poetic name, perhaps, but not an innocent one. Terra Secreta appears in alchemical texts referring not to spiritual realms, but to unknown continents, forbidden geographies, Atlantis by another name. Another strand of the Codex legend includes a curious drawing, not of a saint or a city, but of a layered circle. Land, then water, then land again, surrounded by jagged waves or mountain lines. At the center sits a single symbol, a cross within a triangle. The triangle appears in multiple Templar engravings. The cross is obvious, but together they symbolize knowledge hidden within the framework of faith, truth concealed inside doctrine. The Templars excelled at layered meanings. Their architecture hid sacred geometry. Their prayers were ciphers. Their books, when they dared write them, were rarely straightforward. Encoded geography disguised as theology would have been their perfect method. Protected, deniable, brilliant. And then comes the fire. The Codex allegedly ends with a vision of a land consumed by fire and water, the sky cracking, and a voice declaring, "This was once Eden, and now it shall be forgotten." Apocalyptic, yes. Metaphorical, maybe. But you've seen those warnings before. They echo in Plato's dialogues, in Gnostic Coptic hymns, and most chillingly, in the trial testimony of a Templar named Bertrand de Morn. Before his execution, he reportedly muttered, "The water will rise again, and those who remember will burn." Was he speaking metaphorically, or recalling something older, darker, forbidden? The truth behind the Codex of Gaisors remains physically buried. French authorities refuse any further excavation beneath the chateau. Their reasoning, the preservation of national heritage. A noble excuse, a convenient one. And yet, the tunnels remain. So do the rumors. And so lingers the unsettling possibility that somewhere behind bricked walls and 7 centuries of silence lies a manuscript written by exiled knights, describing a place history swears could not have existed. A place they believed held keys to a past the church rejected and a future it feared. You step deeper into a chamber lit not by torches, but by stubs of flickering candles wedged into iron sconces shaped like 8-pointed stars. The room smells of beeswax and old parchment, and something else: cedar, myrrh, a faint incense trail that should not survive centuries. This is not a treasury, nor a shrine. It's something more dangerous. A private study within the order, a sanctuary for forbidden thought. The Templars are often imagined as stern warrior monks, but behind that public portrait was a quieter one, shadowed in margins of manuscripts, whispered in court transcripts after the arrests. They were soldiers, yes, but also collectors of knowledge. And some of that knowledge came from Hermetic sources, texts born of the Greco-Egyptian world, smuggled through Islamic Spain, copied by mystics, and shared only with those brave or reckless enough to read them. Hermeticism, named after Hermes Trismegistus, wove together astrology, sacred geometry, alchemy, and metaphysics. It saw the universe as a mirror, where heaven and earth reflected each other, as above, so below. That phrase appears not only in Hermetic scrolls, but scratched into stone in several surviving Templar outposts. During their years in the Holy Land, the Templars encountered more than enemies. They met Sufis, Copts, Gnostics, Nestorians, men who read the stars like scripture and viewed history as a cycle rather than a straight line. To knights living at the border of worlds, east and west, spirit and sword, these ideas were heretical, intoxicating, and irresistible. One fragment, found near Tortosa, lists forbidden teachings hurriedly scribbled on a piece of sheepskin during the early waves of suppression. Among warnings about idols and unholy rites, one line stands out: the echo of the first city drowned beneath the flood. Its fire remains in the symbols of the serpent and the star. A strange sentence, unless you have been following these echoes. Atlantis, Hermetic cosmology, Templar secrecy, all pointing toward the same ancient fear. And suddenly you understand why a codex might have been hidden, why tunnels might have been sealed, why legends refuse to die. Because somewhere in these shadows, beneath a Norman chateau, beneath centuries of dust, may rest a manuscript describing a place that should never have existed, and yet somehow still echoes through the beliefs of those who once guarded it with their lives. Atlantis is never mentioned outright. It never is. But as you move through these scraps of testimony, symbols, and half-erased diagrams, a pattern begins to unfold. The flood, the fire, the lost city, the esoteric markings, the serpent star motif. It all begins to echo something older than the Templars themselves. That symbol, the serpent coiled around a triangle, appears again in Hermetic alchemical diagrams representing the prima materia, the very origin, point of transformation. In one image attributed to an anonymous 13th century Templar scribe, a serpent circles a triangle inscribed with a name now smudged beyond recognition. Beneath it, a fractured Greek phrase lingers: "The light that fell will rise again." That isn't Christianity. It isn't Orthodox mysticism. It belongs to a different lineage entirely. Then there is the Book of the Bound Star, a rumored Templar volume never recovered. Legends say it contained dream maps, descriptions of geometric cities arranged in circles, and references to the submerged wisdom of the West. Again, nothing explicit. Yet layer these fragments: the serpent triangle symbol, concentric ring imagery, drowned kingdoms, and an unsettling picture emerges. They weren't chasing utopia. They were chasing patterns, recurring shapes in scripture, history, and the sky. The Hermetic worldview, with its belief in cosmic cycles of destruction and renewal, offered the Templars a lens through which Atlantis transformed from allegory to suppressed memory, something that had happened before and could happen again. One might argue that the Templars saw their own fate reflected in this mythic mirror, an enlightened brotherhood destroyed for reaching beyond the limits set by church and crown. Perhaps it was a grim prophecy they walked into willingly. And after the order's dissolution, rumors say its remnants, especially in Portugal and Scotland, influenced emerging esoteric societies. Some see traces of them in early Rosicrucian writings. Others point to Freemasonic symbols, the spiral staircase, the sacred compass, the twin pillars. A cryptic line in a surviving letter from a knight named Arnaud Daillon ties the threads together. The temple fell, but the map remains. In the map, the drowned light waits for the worthy. Metaphorical? Maybe. But in the Templar Hermetic worldview, metaphors were never just metaphors. They were keys. So if the map was real, and if the drowned light referred to knowledge lost beneath waves, perhaps the journey west wasn't only physical, it was alchemical. A final initiation. A transformation beyond land, law, and empire. To understand how far this hidden thread stretched, you return to the Holy Land, the crossroads of worlds. Jerusalem and Acre weren't just battlegrounds. They were libraries, markets of ideas, living archives of civilizations older than Christendom. A Templar knight stationed there would quickly discover that the spiritual world did not begin and end with Latin prayers. He would meet Coptic priests, Ethiopian monks, Persian astronomers, Jewish scholars, Sufi wanderers, each carrying fragments of ancient traditions. Egypt, especially, changed everything. Not the Egypt of pyramids and mummies, though those shadows loomed. This was the Egypt of knowledge. Coptic Christians guarded banned gospels. Desert monasteries preserved pre-Islamic manuscripts and whispered tales of civilizations, drowned long before Moses. One Templar note from Ascalon mentions a scroll called The Drowned Kings, seen at a Coptic sanctuary. Its contents eerily similar to Plato's Atlantis, a civilization punished for defying divine order, its wisdom scattered, its symbols buried. Arabic scholars, inheritors of Greek science, shared star charts, translations of Plato, Aristotle, Ptolemy, sometimes unknowingly handing pieces of ancient maps to the knights who listened. The Templars absorbed navigational techniques, astronomical calculations, and forbidden texts with a practicality that bordered on hunger. In Cairo, some even slipped into the famed House of Wisdom under false names, copying diagrams by candlelight. One such text, now lost, was known through fragments as Al-Makat al-Makiyah, the Book of the Hidden Kingdom. A 17th century attempt to translate it claims it described a civilization drowned by rising waters, ruled by star-reading priests who warned of a second catastrophe. Then comes the most haunting link. A letter from a Templar in Alexandria to a commander in Acre. He describes a tomb without bones, believed to house scrolls wrapped in lead, hidden beneath a temple of angles and circles, where water flows upward. Historians debate its meaning, Saqqara, Heliopolis, or something stranger. But one theory suggests it wasn't a tomb at all. It was a geometric map, encoded in architecture, of a city long gone beneath the ocean. A mnemonic blueprint of Atlantis. The parallels grow impossible to ignore. Egyptian flood myths, Plato's concentric rings, Hermetic symbols, Templar fragments, each telling the same story in different tongues. A civilization that rose too high, fell too far, and left behind warnings embedded in symbols, stars, and stone. And then comes the twist whispered in esoteric circles, that Atlantis and ancient Egypt were not two stories, but one lineage. That Egypt was built not after Atlantis, but from it. That its priests preserved what could be saved. and that the Templars, through Copts, scholars, Sufis, and Hermetic texts, caught the echo of that forbidden memory. Whether true or not almost doesn't matter. What matters is that the Templars believed it, and belief, especially in the hands of men with ships, secrecy and purpose, is enough to launch a fleet west into the unknown, chasing a drowned light they were never meant to find. Atlantis is never named outright. It never had to be, because once you follow the trail, the floods, the fires, the lost cities, the esoteric symbols, the serpent and star motif, you begin to sense the shape of something larger. That motif in particular shows up in Hermetic alchemical diagrams representing the prima materia, the first substance from which all transformation begins. One 13th century illustration, attributed to an anonymous Templar scribe, shows a coiled serpent encircling a triangle with a half-erased name at its center. Beneath it, in broken Greek, is written, "The light that fell will rise again." That single sentence does not belong to medieval Christian theology. It belongs to something older, stranger, and far more esoteric. Then there are the whispered accounts of the Book of the Bound Star, a rumored Templar manuscript never found. It was said to contain dream maps, geometric cities built in concentric rings, and cryptic references to submerged wisdom from the far west. Nothing explicit, nothing incriminating. Yet when placed side by side with the serpent diagrams, the flood testimonies, and the Hermetic symbols, obsession becomes impossible to ignore. The Templars weren't looking for utopia. They were searching for patterns, echoes of an ancient catastrophe they believed was cyclical. Hermetic philosophy, with its cycles of destruction and renewal, gave them a framework to interpret the Atlantis story as a suppressed memory, not fiction. In that mirror, they saw themselves, an enlightened brotherhood punished for crossing boundaries drawn by church and crown. After the order fell, many rumored survivors in Portugal and Scotland gravitated toward emerging esoteric groups. Some see Templar influence in early Rosicrucian manifestos. Others see it reflected in the symbolic language of early Freemasonry. Spiral staircases, sacred compasses, twin pillars echoing ancient architecture. But one quote, attributed to a knight named Arnaud Daillon, seems to tie it all together. The temple fell, but the map remains. In the map, the drowned light waits for the worthy. Poetic, yes, but within the Templar Hermetic worldview, poetry was code. Metaphors were keys. If the map was real, and if the drowned light referred to knowledge submerged with Atlantis, then their westward journeys were not merely geographical. They were alchemical, transformative, a final initiation beyond empire and dogma. But the trail doesn't end in the Holy Land. It stretches into Egypt. Not the Egypt of pyramids alone, but Egypt as a custodian of ancient memory. In Acre, Jerusalem, and Ascalon, Templar knights rubbed shoulders with Coptic monks, Ethiopian mystics, Persian astronomers, Jewish scholars, and Sufi wanderers. Egypt became a turning point. Coptic Christians preserved banned gospels and pre-Islamic manuscripts. Desert monasteries near Alexandria whispered of a civilization predating even the pharaohs, one that flourished long before Moses, then drowned. One Templar margin note from Ascalon mentions a scroll called the Drowned Kings, seen in a Coptic sanctuary. Its narrative disturbingly similar to Plato's Atlantis. A civilization destroyed for defying divine order, its wisdom scattered and buried in symbols. Arabic scholars enriched the Templars further, sharing star charts, translated Greek texts, and navigational sciences long forgotten in medieval Europe. The Templars copied diagrams, learned celestial navigation, and even slipped into the House of Wisdom under assumed identities. A lost Arabic text, Al-Makat al-Makhiyah, the Book of the Hidden Kingdom, was said to describe a priest-ruled society drowned when waters rose and warned of another catastrophe yet to come. The most haunting clue appears in a Templar letter sent from Alexandria, a tomb without bones, believed to hold scrolls wrapped in lead beneath a temple of angles and circles where water flows upward. Historians argue over the location, Saqqara, Heliopolis, but one theory suggests it wasn't a tomb at all. It was a geometric map encoded in architecture, a memory of a drowned city preserved in stone form. When compared to Plato's concentric rings, land, water, land, this Egyptian echo becomes hard to dismiss. Atlantis in Greek, Septe in Egyptian myth. Two names for the same ancestral wound. This leads to a fringe theory whispered with unnerving consistency. The Templars believed Atlantis didn't vanish. It fragmented. Survivors fled east and south, founding colonies, seeding myths, encoding their knowledge into temples, pyramids, symbols. In this view, Egypt wasn't a beginning. It was a grave marker. And the Templars weren't pilgrims. They were scavengers of forgotten truth. After returning from the east, the Templars began subtly integrating Eastern architectural motifs into their European fortresses. Domes, star patterns, unusual floor plans. Scholars dismissed it as aesthetic flair. But if Egypt opened a philosophical door for them, these features look like devotion, not decoration. One final note scribbled in the margin of a confiscated Templar psalter mentions the drowned city beyond the pillars, known in the desert by another name. The shaky handwriting suggests urgency, a memory whispered just long enough to be hidden. And so the Nile joins the Atlantic in this web of buried history. Egypt becomes less an influence and more a transmitter, a bridge between worlds. A place where Templar curiosity collided with ancient recollection and birthed a question they could never silence. What if the stories of a lost civilization weren't echoes, but warnings? That question follows you west to Portugal, into the hills of Tomar, where the convent of Christ rises like a stone labyrinth, wrapped in centuries of memory. Tourists stroll its cloisters, unaware that beneath the round church, modeled after the Holy Sepulchre, lies something older, stranger. A chamber locals call the Vault of the Drowned World. Not officially, of course, but whispers persist. The room beneath isn't circular like the church above. It's hexagonal, sunken, eerily still. A shallow depression sits at its center, like a drained basin. The frescoes appear biblical until you look closer. Spiraling cities crumbling into waves, robed figures pointing west, and a faint depiction of a three-ringed city swallowed by water. Some say the chamber was for initiation rites. Others call it a relic vault. But a growing number of researchers believe it's an Atlantean vault, not a remnant of Atlantis, but a memory of it, encoded by those who feared the church would silence the truth. Supporting this theory is a Latin inscription carved near a disused staircase. He who drowned shall rise when the twin suns fall. Poetic, ominous, easily dismissed, yet uncomfortably close to Plato's cycles of destruction and rebirth. More unsettling is the vault's geometry, a six-pointed star enclosing a circle, mirroring diagrams from Alexandria describing the seal of the hidden land, a symbol of the meeting point between divine knowledge and earthly domain. That convergence is the heart of the Atlantis myth. Monastic records add fuel to the fire. A 1523 entry warns, "None are to speak of the older stone beneath, nor the signs scratched upon it." No explanation, just silence. The vault was bricked over for nearly a century afterward. Even today, access is restricted with vague preservation excuses. One German historian requested permission to scan it. He was denied twice. Later, he claimed the chamber held pre-Columbian knowledge disguised as apocalyptic scripture. Scholars laughed, but he never retracted it. You begin to wonder, why the secrecy? Why the geometry? Why frescoes that contradict doctrine? Why a basin with no liturgical purpose? Why inscriptions that call not for salvation, but remembrance? The Templars guarded secrets considered too dangerous for kings and popes. What if one of those secrets was the memory of a civilization destroyed not by sin alone, but by time, water, and forgetting? And what if they preserved that memory beneath the sacred foundations of their strongest fortress? Not to honor the past, but to warn the future. You step out of the vault into the sunlight of Tomar. Bells ring overhead. Tourists chatter. But underground, the stone waits. Silent, patient, holding on. You're no longer walking on the polished floors of history. You're beneath it, where symbols whisper and the world behind the world begins to reveal itself. You've descended now into the oldest, strangest chambers of Europe's Templar world. Domed crypts in France, cellar vaults in Portugal, limestone tunnels beneath Aragon. These places were never meant for burial or simple storage. Their architecture whispers a different purpose entirely. Secrecy, silence, and perhaps signals. The Templars used symbols openly. The red cross pate, the 8-pointed star, the double-headed eagle. But behind these public emblems lay a hidden language carved into lintels, pillars, altar bases. Most pilgrims would never notice it, but if you knew what to look for, it spoke with unsettling clarity. In the vault of a ruined Castilian commandery, a French historian found a sequence of engravings carved low behind an altar. 3 concentric rings, wavy lines between them, and a tiny triangle at the center pointing west. He first assumed it was a sundial until he realized it had no time. Markings, no indicators at all. Just circles, water, and direction. It echoed Plato's layout of Atlantis, but it also mirrored astronomical diagrams from Arabic almanacs, charts used to track stars visible only in the far western Atlantic sky. The implication was subtle but profound. The Templars weren't only looking toward Jerusalem, they were watching the western heavens, perhaps for something that once aligned above a lost land. Another clue lies beneath the Templar Chapel in Metz. There, hidden under soot and fallen brick, the floor tiles form a spiral, blue-black stone curling like a nautilus shell. At its center once sat a golden inlay, later pried out. Some say the spiral represents spiritual ascent, but a rival theory suggests something darker, that the spiral mimics a vortex, a floodgate, a symbolic collapse described in a 13th century esoteric scroll stored in Carcassonne, a scroll referencing a circular city drowned in symmetry and judgment. Again, the name is never stated, but the resemblance is unmistakable. The deeper you go into these chambers, the more consistent the clues become. Not identical, never copied, but harmonized, like variations of a theme. 6-petaled rosettes carved in shadowed corners, dotted sequences in a mysterious 3-5-3 alignment etched into the undersides of arches, arrows pointing westward in places no daylight could ever reach. In a Scottish commandery at Bellantredoc, a seemingly scratched beam, when lit at the right angle, reveals an angular cipher matching diagrams found in Renaissance occult manuscripts that speculated on Atlantis. It shows a rising wave curling over a stepped city, and beneath it, a single word, Riemann. Let it remain. But what was meant to remain? The unease grows when you realize many of these carvings were placed in positions requiring kneeling, crawling, or candlelight alignment. This wasn't decoration. It was ritual instruction, a coded script buried in stone meant for the initiated alone. One of the most controversial finds surfaced in a dilapidated Templar outpost near Braga, Portugal. During storm damage repairs, workers exposed a sealed chamber. Beneath the plastered wall was a full cosmological diagram: suns, moons, waves, stars, and a city drawn in 3 rings, half submerged. The fresco was never officially published, but someone leaked photographs. Authorities screamed hoax, but those present insist it was real. They insist it wasn't artwork. It was a map. And here lies the tension history refuses to settle. If these underground symbols and diagrams aren't art, then they're a message. If they're a message, they were meant for someone. A successor order, a later brotherhood, or perhaps no one. Just a warning thrown forward in time like a message in a bottle, waiting for an age that might understand it. Because the Templars didn't only hide treasure, they hid meaning, layered it into geometry, stained glass, floor patterns, and altars. Once you know how to see it, it's everywhere. Whispering of a world lost, a memory buried, a geometry once used to describe a city swallowed by waves. They never carved the word Atlantis, but they didn't need to. And then comes the Grail. You know the public version. The chalice said to hold the blood of Christ, the shining relic of Arthurian romance. But beneath that polished legend lies something older and more dangerous. The Grail, in its earliest literary appearance, wasn't a cup at all. Chrétien de Troyes, writing under the patronage of Marie de Champagne, whose family moved in Templar-friendly circles, described not a chalice, but a glowing, ambiguous object carried through a mysterious castle. No mention of Christ's blood, no solid doctrine, just mystery, ritual, and a knight who fails because he does not ask the right question. Later writers pushed the symbol further. Wolfram von Eschenbach in Parzival calls the Grail a stone, not a vessel, a stone of power, a source of transformation. His guardians of the Grail, a group of knights called the Templars, the elders of the temple. Scholars debate whether this is coincidence or coded reference. But Eschenbach insisted his source was a lost Arabic manuscript, a claim dismissed as literary flair, unless it wasn't. Strip away the medieval embellishment, and the Grail begins to look less like a relic of Christianity and more like a cipher, a place, an idea, a source of power, a fragment of knowledge preserved from a world that drowned. Perhaps even the memory of Atlantis itself, encoded in myth, so the church couldn't destroy it. And suddenly, the Templars' westward symbols, their star-tracking diagrams, their sealed murals of ringed cities, their vortex spirals, their alchemical warnings, it all begins to converge. A drowned world, a lost light, a secret geometry. They never said the name, but the stones did. You begin to wonder, especially when Wolfram speaks of the Grail as something that sustains those who guard it, not just in the body, but in the spirit. In that light, the Grail becomes less a sacred cup and more a metaphor for forbidden knowledge, a relic not of Christ's bloodline, but of an older lineage, one buried beneath floods, empires, and rewritten histories. Some researchers argue the Grail is code, a symbol for a lost civilization, a pure source of ancient wisdom carried forward in secret after the world before the world was destroyed. Atlantis, in this interpretation, didn't vanish. It survived as memory, encrypted into myth, symbol, ritual. and guarded by men wealthy enough to search and heretical enough to believe. Templar initiation rites only deepen the suspicion. A new knight passed through stages of silence, darkness, confession, symbolic death, and rebirth. That's not military training. That's transformation. A ritual echoing the hermetic and mystical traditions they encountered in the East. And in certain commanderies, scholars have traced architectural alignments that mimic the symbolic path of Parzival's journey. Courtyard to cloister to inner chamber. Always inward, always westward, like a pilgrimage toward a lost world. One controversial theory goes even further. The Grail isn't a cup. It's the memory of Atlantis encoded as parable. A warning. A story of a great civilization, undone by pride, buried beneath water, preserved only in fragments. In this telling, the Grail Knights aren't searching for an object, they're seeking the return of an era. Suddenly, the Church's fear of the Templars becomes clearer. In suppressed trial testimony, one friar claimed initiates were told, "The world was once whole, and we carry its broken pieces." Heretical? Absolutely. But if the Templars believed themselves heirs to a forgotten age, their silence wasn't secrecy. It was guardianship. The legends begin to blur. The drowned city, the holy object, the flood, the quest. They are all versions of the same story. Plato, Chrétien, Wolfram, the Templars, all whispering the same truth in different tongues. And then the jungle breathes around you. Humid air clings to your skin as you stand before a stone relief somewhere between Chiapas and Yucatan. A temple rises behind you, steep, angular, its summit lost in mist. Carved on its walls are serpent stars, celestial spirals, and figures in strange armor. But one symbol freezes you in place. A cross. Not a Latin cross. A cross pate, the kind worn by Templars. It shouldn't be here. Pre-Columbian civilizations, the Olmec, Maya, Aztec, were not supposed to have had contact with Europe before Columbus. That's the backbone of Western historical narrative. And yet scattered across the Americas lie unsettling anomalies. Carvings of bearded figures, metallurgical techniques far ahead of their time, and symbols that look suspiciously Mediterranean. One of the most troubling artifacts is the Fuente Magna Bowl of Bolivia, whose inscriptions appear Sumerian or Proto-Semitic, an impossibility by official standards. But what matters more here is its symbolism. Concentric rings, stylized water, and a cross inside a triangle. Another anomaly appears in Veracruz, Mexico, where a weather-worn stela at La Venta shows a robed figure with what looks very much like a Templar-style cross. Scholars dismiss it as a flower, a star, a coincidence. But when placed into the growing list of Westward Templar theories, such dismissals grow thin. Then there is the alleged Templar stone of Nova Scotia, discovered near the future site of Oak Island. A weathered tablet etched with ships, a triangle enclosing a circle, and, again, the familiar cross. Its provenance is debated, but the geometry mirrors hermetic diagrams linked to submerged cities and celestial gateways. Which brings us back to the vanished Templar fleet of La Rochelle. If even a small portion of those ships crossed the Atlantic, it isn't impossible that they encountered cultures much older than Europe, or perhaps echoes of something older still. Bernardino de Sahagún, a 16th century missionary, recorded Nahua myths describing white-robed visitors who came before the fire gods. Translation errors muddy the meaning, but such myths aren't isolated. Polynesian traditions mention similar strangers. Andean tribes speak of drowned ancestors. In the Amazon, elders still tell stories of the drowned ones, travelers from a sunken homeland who left behind songs and symbols. You hesitate. These stories are sacred, vulnerable to exploitation, easily twisted into theories that disrespect indigenous memory. But if you strip away the colonizer's gaze and simply listen, a pattern emerges. Cultures separated by oceans, each whispering of a time before the flood, and of those who remembered. If the Templars truly carried maps and myths westward, they may have seen these stories not as conquest, but confirmation. Imagine a Templar scribe copying Mayan glyphs he couldn't decode, yet recognizing the spirals, the stars, the rings, familiar geometry, familiar wounds. Maybe they didn't understand what they found. Maybe they only sensed the echo. But if different continents held pieces of the same story, then the Templars' search for Atlantis wasn't a wild quest across the Atlantic. It was a journey into memory. And memory, especially when carved in stone, does not forget. Now the story shifts from myths and symbols to something that happened in daylight. Something undeniable. Something that left marks not even the church could erase. Portugal in the early 15th century was small, hungry, and ready to rewrite the map of the world. And at the center of its ambition stood Prince Henry the Navigator, a man often painted as an explorer, but who, beneath the surface, may have been something far stranger. A custodian of secrets he did not invent, but inherited. Because behind him, quietly, invisibly, stood the afterlife of the Knights Templar. When the Templar order was officially suppressed in 1312, France burned its knights and seized their wealth. Portugal, however, did not. King Dinas simply changed their name. The Order of the Temple became the Order of Christ. Same fortresses, same lands, same rituals, same brothers. New emblem. A legal disguise. A continuity hidden in plain sight. It was this Order of Christ that sponsored Prince Henry. It was their cross he painted on the sails of his ships. It was their structure and secrecy that shaped his navigation school in Sagres. And it was from Templar ports that his fleets departed. Officially, these voyages were meant to map the African coast and expand trade. But when you look closer, something strange happens. Many early expeditions veered westward instead of following profitable routes south. Some arrived at islands that weren't supposed to exist yet. The Azores, Madeira, the Canaries, each aligning, eerily with older Templar charts rumored to have survived in Portuguese monasteries. Prince Henry himself was a curious anomaly. Deeply religious, painfully intelligent, and surrounded by cosmographers and mystics, he wasn't simply exploring the world, he was studying it, collecting star charts, ancient manuscripts, hermetic texts. He held royal power but harbored esoteric obsessions, and if he inherited the Templar legacy, that obsession may have included something unspoken, a belief in a lost Western land waiting to be rediscovered. Walk through the Convent of Christ in Tomar and you'll see it. Stone carvings shifting from Christian motifs to armillary spheres, solar emblems, spirals, and sacred geometries. Even the famous Manueline window, a masterpiece of knots, ropes, waves, begins to look less decorative the longer you examine it. It feels encoded, like a stone map of currents and cycles, perhaps even a memory. Then there's the cross, the red cross of the Order of Christ, descended directly from the Templar cross. It is the symbol on the sails that reach Brazil. The very cross carried by the ships that Columbus sailed beneath decades later. Not a royal emblem, a legacy. And here, timelines begin to blur. If the Templars were searching for Atlantis, if their maps and symbols survived through the Order of Christ, then Prince Henry may not have initiated new voyages. he may have resumed them. A quest interrupted by persecution, resurrected by a prince who believed the path had never been lost. One suspicious document, circulating in esoteric circles, claims to be a navigator's letter describing islands where the sky wheels in silence and the land sings with circles. Ridiculous on the surface, poetic underneath. But when compared with Templar imagery of ringed cities and harmonic geometries, it echoes too closely to ignore. Atlantis, to these seekers, wasn't a myth to prove. It was an ideal to rediscover, a pattern to revive, a world that once existed that could exist again. And the Order of Christ became the perfect vessel, legal, respected, wealthy, and spiritually unbound. The Atlantic, according to textbooks, was empty before these explorers crossed it, a void of wind and water. But reality refuses to stay that clean. You stumble upon a stone tower in Madeira no one can date correctly. You find medieval tools in the Azores that predate their discovery by a century. You hear whispers of graves in Iceland marked with crosses Vikings never used. And suddenly, the ocean stops feeling empty. The Atlantic Templar basis theory emerges, that the Templars, or their successors, didn't just cross the ocean. They paused on it, built on it, left signs behind. Not colonies, but staging posts. Quiet, isolated, hidden. Waypoints along a forbidden route. Start with Madeira. Discovered in 1419, supposedly uninhabited. But early chroniclers describe terraced fields overtaken by jungle and cisterns carved in mathematically perfect circles, the hallmark of Templar design. Too old for the Portuguese, too complex for unknown settlers, just right for someone who sailed earlier. Then the Azores. We've discussed the crosses, but look deeper. Stone tunnels with no known function, paths leading nowhere. European ceramics a century too early. In one cave, a Latin inscription reads, Fratres fugerunt, sediter mane. The brothers fled, but the path remained. That line feels heavier now. Even Iceland, far from all reasonable routes, enters the narrative. Ruins with European-style angles, but not Norse. A moss-covered stone cross carved in unmistakably Templar proportions. And in Newfoundland, before Lanceau Meadows was excavated, locals told tales of men in white cloaks who built a small inland chapel marked with strange stars. You begin to see it. A chain of forgotten stations across the ocean, built by men who weren't colonizers, but seekers. And if these places were real, if the path west existed long before Columbus, then perhaps the Templars weren't chasing treasure or land. They were chasing memory, a drowned world, a forbidden truth, a geometry of circles and stars that once defined a civilization swallowed by water. The story now shifts from myth and whispers to an event in daylight, witnessed, recorded, undeniable, and yet fully misunderstood by history. These tales were long dismissed as fantasy, until soil samples near certain Atlantic rock formations revealed traces of European metals dated to the 1300s. Not definitive, but not easy to wave away. Critics of the Templar base theory argue these findings are nothing more than accidents of archaeology, artifacts dragged by currents, or misinterpreted scraps with no real provenance. And to be fair, history is built on context, not coincidence. But step back, and a different picture begins to form, one too coherent to ignore. What unites these scattered places, Madeira, the Azores, Iceland, coastal Nova Scotia, is not merely the artifacts found upon them. It's their placement. Draw a line from Portugal westward, curving slightly with the Atlantic winds, and each of these islands falls into place like stones on a hidden staircase, an arc pointing toward a destination just beyond the horizon. That arc mirrors roots found on Old Templar sea charts. It matches whispered paths preserved in esoteric diaries. And most strangely of all, it aligns with star patterns found in hermetic diagrams. Charts said to map the drowned crown, a mythical constellation guiding seekers to the place that fell. One fringe researcher even claims Templar architecture across Europe encodes the same triangulation. His calculations were mocked, dismissed as pareidolia, but the buildings remain, their angles still whispering the same direction, west. It becomes easy to imagine it. A clandestine network scattered across the ocean, not built for empire or settlement, but for initiation. A series of hidden waypoints where only the prepared, the loyal, the initiated were meant to pass. Each island, a test. Each station, a rung on a ladder made from stone, salt, and secrecy. And if, at the end of this westward pilgrimage, the Templars found nothing, no shining city, no ringed island rising from the sea, perhaps that was the point. Atlantis wasn't waiting to be found. It was waiting to be remembered. Its wisdom encoded not in a place, but in geometry, ritual, and myth. The Templars may have left no triumphant records, no claims of discovery, but they left signs, stones muttering beneath moss, symbols etched into hidden chambers, navigational paths burned into the collective dream of their successors. You unroll a map, not a modern chart, but a compilation of Templar era sites across Europe. At first, it looks random. Chapels, fortresses, commanderies scattered like spilled ink. But then you start connecting them, and something unsettling emerges. The dots align, angles repeat, distances echo. A grid begins to take shape. It doesn't point to Jerusalem. It doesn't point to Rome. It points west. This forms the basis of the Atlantean coordinates hypothesis, a fringe theory gaining slow, uncomfortable traction. It proposes that the Templars arranged their European sites not just for defense or pilgrimage, but as part of a terrestrial star map, a geospatial code aimed across the ocean. At the heart of this theory sits Rennes-le-Château, a village infamous for secrets, encoded church art, and a history far stranger than fiction. It lies along a sacred axis running through southwestern France. Along this line sit the abbey at Saint-Léonard, the stronghold at Montségur, even Gisors. And when these are plotted, they don't form a straight line, but a gentle curve arcing toward the Atlantic. Extend farther north, connect Tomar in Portugal to Ballantradoch in Scotland, then south through La Rochelle. The resulting shape is an almost perfect equilateral triangle, once adjusted for Earth's curvature. Inside this triangle lie dozens of lesser-known Templar chapels aligned with astonishing consistency to equinox lines, solar events, and nautical bearings that point not east toward the Holy Land, but west toward the Azores. It doesn't end there. Satellite surveys of ruins in Portugal reveal floor plans built using geometric ratios found in ancient Egyptian and Greek sacred architecture, ratios linked to cosmology and mythic geography. These sites, when mapped globally, trace a line that cuts through the Atlantic, straight toward a seafloor anomaly, a submerged plateau just west of the mid-Atlantic ridge. Oceanographers have studied it. Historians ignore it. Alternative researchers argue it is too symmetrical to be natural. Critics laugh as they always do. Patterns appear easily when the human mind wants them. But the problem is not that the pattern exists. The problem is that the pattern is too consistent. The angles match. The geometry repeats. The distances resonate with sacred measures used across ancient civilizations. Even the famous Rosslyn Chapel, with its carvings of plants native to the Americas before Columbus, fits the pattern. Whoever built it wasn't looking toward Jerusalem. They were retracing a path older than the church would dare acknowledge. A forgotten codex written by a German cartographer around 1400 contains a cryptic line. The temples of the Red Cross do not point toward Jerusalem. They point to the fallen Eden. Fallen Eden appears again in Templar marginal notes from Avignon, paired alongside the phrase Regnum sub aqua, the kingdom beneath the water. It leads to the theory's most provocative claim. The Templars never expected to find Atlantis whole. They believed it had been destroyed, swallowed by the sea, as Plato described. But they also believed its coordinates remained, encoded not in surviving islands, but in the very shape of sacred buildings. By aligning their commanderies across Europe, they believed they were honoring the cosmic architecture Atlantis once embodied. So what were they pointing toward? A real place, a metaphysical threshold, a memory woven into stone, or a truth too dangerous to speak aloud? The Templars weren't simply searching for Atlantis. They were rebuilding its map, a skeleton of rings and stars and geometry stretching across continents. A map whispered through stone, a map that still converges somewhere beneath the ocean's roar, waiting. There's an odd kind of noise in silence, an almost electrical hum beneath the absence. That's the feeling you get when you begin probing the Vatican's secret archives. Not the shelves, not the files, not the papal seals, but the gaps. The empty spaces where something should be and isn't. Officially, the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, renamed more gently as the Vatican Apostolic Archive, holds over 50 miles of shelving. Letters between kings and popes, trial records, suppressed manuscripts, forbidden books. The Templar trials are among the better-known collections. Accusations, confessions, retractions, interrogations. But when you examine them closely, a strange pattern emerges. Pages are missing. Sections are sealed without explanation. And entire files referenced in older indexes simply no longer exist. One of the most intriguing absences involves the La Rochelle fleet, the ships that vanished the night before the Templar arrests. Early papal summaries refer to missing vessels, unexplained departures, and unaccounted cargo. But follow the citations, and the trail collapses into nothing. Either the documents were never archived, or they were removed. Even stranger is a sealed folio known only by its internal code, Reg V, Antwedes 8. The description is vague, concerning naval inventory and rumors of heresy abroad. Scholars have repeatedly requested access. Every request has been denied. No reason given, no clarification offered. The assumption: this folio contains early reports that the Templars were attempting to flee Europe, or worse, establish a new foundation elsewhere. But the folio hasn't been opened in over 200 years. The real puzzle surfaced in 1923, when a Jesuit historian researching papal commentary on Islamic geography discovered something misfiled beneath unrelated documents. Inside was a letter dated 1310, addressed to Pope Clement XI. The letter warns that certain Templars were spreading errant teachings, beliefs that the world held a buried light in the waters of the West, and that the destruction of Atlantis prefigured the fall of Rome, and by extension, the church itself. The letter is unsigned, its author unknown, but the papal reply, brief, cold, final, survives. This is not for Rome to chase. Let silence do what justice cannot. That reply disappeared soon after rediscovery. Officially, it is under review. Scholars who cite it 2 too loudly risk losing their access badges. Some have. Others simply speak with the soft, careful tone of men who know they're walking on cracking ice. The Vatican, of course, has every right to protect sensitive materials. Many records are fragile, deteriorating, or irrelevant to modern research. But the pattern surrounding the Templar files is odd. Financial records, open. Livestock inventories, open. Property deeds, wide open. But where you'd expect the deeper writings, the philosophical texts, letters from distant commanderies, naval logs, there is silence, especially concerning Iberia. The Portuguese Templars were absorbed as the Order of Christ. You'd expect lengthy Vatican documentation on this transition. Member lists, inventories, reconciliations. Instead, the records read like public relations statements. Polished, shallow, evasive. They document a transformation with no explanation of what happened in the shadows between the lines. A medieval rumor insists that Pope Clement V received a map from a dying Templar. A map showing a land across the Western Ocean, ringed with rivers, hidden from the children of Eve. No such map survives, of course, but 3 separate 14th century clerical letters reference something mysterious: the Pope's secret globe. What it was, no one knows. Then there is the case of the Codex Umbrarum, the Book of Shadows, a manuscript allegedly written by a Templar scribe in 1306 and confiscated during the arrests. 2 inventory lists from Avignon mention it explicitly. Today, it does not exist. Not in Rome, not in Avignon, not anywhere. Only one note remains: contained martyrs of cosmology and alternate creation. Locked, and lost. You begin to suspect the silence isn't the product of neglect. It's deliberate. Atlantis wasn't dangerous because it was pagan. Pagan myths were absorbed, baptized, rewritten. Atlantis was dangerous because it offered a rival creation story, a history before Genesis, a story of a civilization destroyed not by God, but by its own geometry, its own cycles, its own stars. A worldview rooted not in sin and salvation, but in pattern and transformation. If the Templars preserved fragments of that story, if they carried maps, symbols, or teachings that pointed to a world older than Scripture, then the Church had only one option: silence. Not to protect the truth, but to protect the narrative. You lay your eyes on a fragment of parchment, yellowed, curled, fragile as a dried leaf. It isn't medieval exactly, it dates to 1513, but the voice inside it feels older, much older. You're looking at the infamous Piri Reis map, drawn by an Ottoman admiral whose knowledge came from places no historian can confidently chart. In vivid reds and greens, the map outlines Europe, Africa, and, most baffling of all, the coast of South America, drawn before South America had supposedly been discovered. Piri Reis himself claimed his sources came from older charts, crafted by seafarers whose names had already dissolved into myth. Some he attributed to the Portuguese. Others he described only as belonging to ancient navigators of uncertain origin. Then he added a detail, almost as an afterthought. One of his sources came from a map found among the infidels who worshipped the Cross of Red. Most shrug and say he meant Christians. But to anyone following the trail of the Templars, that phrase lands like a spark in dry grass. The most notorious anomaly on the map is its depiction of Antarctica, 3 centuries before its official discovery, drawn without ice, showing coastal outlines that some believe match modern seismic surveys. That debate is endless, loud, and unresolved. But the real secret of the map sits not in its geography, but in its symbolism. Alongside coastlines, Piri Reis included alchemical and hermetic imagery, a serpent entwined with a spear, circles surrounded by waves, a cryptic margin note in Ottoman Turkish, the land of rings and kings, swallowed by fire and salt. Poetry? Perhaps. Or memory preserved through metaphor. Some scholars believe the Piri Reis map is a palimpsest, a layered artifact preserving traditions from both East and West, converging in a single document. And at the center of this convergence may have stood the ideological descendants of the Templars, men who combined religion, astronomy, geometry, and forbidden geography into a worldview the Church could never permit. One line in the commentary states that certain coastlines were copied from maps rescued from the Frankish archives. Frankish was common shorthand for crusaders. And if any group maintained secret cartographic archives, it was the Templars, whose naval knowledge was whispered about in the courts of Cairo, Venice, and Rhodes. During their time in the Holy Land, the Templars had access to Islamic star, charts, navigational logs, and cosmological documents unavailable in Europe. If these charts were smuggled back to Portugal, then funneled through the Order of Christ into early Portuguese navigation schools, and from there into Ottoman hands, the chain becomes chillingly plausible, because the real secret of the Piri Reis map is geometry. The land of rings, mentioned in the margins, echoes Plato's Atlantis with unsettling clarity, especially when you notice the strange circles dotting the South American coast. Not cities, but geological features, mountain lakes, depressions, places where something once might have been. Here, the theory darkens. Some occult geographers claim the map encodes a system of spiritual correspondences, describing not just where things are, but when. They argue land masses reflect consciousness, that Atlantis was not merely a location, it was an epoch, and its coordinates echo through the world's shape like a scar. Piri Reis likely didn't believe this, but his sources, perhaps. One margin illustration shows a tower collapsing into waves, labeled the Kingdom of the Wise. No explanation, just a silent, aching symbol. You begin to understand, this isn't just cartography, it's memory, cultural, mythic, inherited through symbols and geometry. And the Templars, if they contributed to these source charts, likely encoded fragments of knowledge only decipherable to initiates. A shoreline that doubles as a celestial timing code. A river that mirrors a star path. A circle marking both a lake and a cosmological cycle. One of the strangest claims about the Piri Reis map came from a 20th century researcher who insisted that when laid over a grid based on platonic solids, the map reveals harmonic resonance points. Atlantean nodes, he called them. He was mocked, ridiculed, but quietly, others began checking the math. The map refuses to behave like a simple artifact. It's both too old and too new, too accurate and too symbolic. It's a paradox, an infuriating, beautiful one. How did it depict lands not yet explored? How did it carry echoes of a worldview lost to Europe for centuries? Why does its language mirror Templar fragments about broken circles and returning floods? You roll the map up. You've gained no answers, only more shapes. But one thing is unmistakably clear. The Templars may have vanished from Europe, but in the margins of forgotten maps, their journey never stopped. And somewhere beneath waves, ink, and silence, the lines still point west. Now you're sitting by a fire in a stone monastery in Cappadocia. Wind howls over the volcanic cliffs, but inside the cell it's warm, dim, timeless. A Coptic monk, ancient, slow, serene, tells you a story you've heard before, but never like this. A city that sank, priests who escaped, stars that wept, And then he adds something stranger. The survivors built again. Not where they were, but where they were, allowed. The idea that some escaped Atlantis is old. Plato hinted at it. Medieval chroniclers blended it with biblical floods. But in certain esoteric circles, in desert brotherhoods, hermetic lodges, Gnostic conventicles, the idea becomes something weightier. That survivors of the catastrophe not only lived, but carried knowledge. Knowledge passed into Egypt, Mesopotamia, and perhaps even the Indus Valley. Knowledge preserved through builders, mathematicians, astronomers, transmitted through stones, symbols, and rites. The Templars were obsessed with origins, and in their strongholds, fragments appear that speak of the people before, not pagans, not Saracens, but the drowned ones who remembered. A Tortosa fragment mentions those who knew when the world ended and why it must do so again. It sounds like Gnostic doom, but what if it wasn't metaphor? What if the Templars believed Atlantis was a real civilization, and that its survivors seeded the world's earliest centers of knowledge? This thread winds toward the ancient figure of Enoch, builder, visionary, recorder of heaven's secrets. In Christianity, Enoch is the scribe of angels. In Islam, he is Idris, a prophet scientist. In esoteric lore, he becomes the blueprint keeper who preserved pre-flood knowledge in stone. A Templar sermon recorded in a scroll written in both Latin and Syriac describes the tower before Babel, marked not by name, but by measure. A structure built according to sacred numbers, echoing drowned cities and forgotten builders who slept in the bones of the earth. If the author believed Atlantis was real, he believed its survivors encoded their wisdom into temples, ziggurats, pyramids, into architecture shaped by resonance and cosmic harmony. You might recall the octagonal towers of Templar churches, the spiral staircases that descend rather than rise, the concentric courtyards echoing ringed cities. These weren't random design choices. They were memory-made stone. Even in the Himalayas, the ancient Bon tradition speaks of Olang Ring, a city of light destroyed by a flood. The parallels stretch too far, too consistently to ignore. And in these whispered stories, the survivors of Atlantis don't vanish. They guide, they teach, they build. And the Templars, with their geometry, their secrecy, their obsession with the past, may have believed they were walking in those footsteps. The map, the symbols, the ruins, the rituals, all parts of a story too old for history, too dangerous for doctrine, too persistent to die. A story that, even now, refuses to stay submerged. In West Africa, the Dogon speak of star-descending visitors from a drowned homeland. In the Americas, Hopi elders tell of the third world sinking beneath water, and those who survived by traveling west across a vast, endless sea. Different continents, distant languages, yet the bones of the story are the same. And if the Templars ever heard these myths during crusades, pilgrimages, or quiet conversations with desert mystics, they may have seen them not as superstition, but as confirmation. Confirmation that Atlantis was never just a catastrophe. It was a message scattered like seeds across the earth. A 1345 Portuguese chronicle records a Templar knight claiming he met a tribe in North Africa who wore star-shaped pendants and spoke of a land where the sun once drowned. No one believed him, but the pendant, still preserved in a small monastery near Évora, bears an unsettling carving. A circle inside a triangle, ringed by 12 lines. It is not Christian, not Islamic, not Roman or Greek, but it does match a symbol sketched in the margins of the lost Codex of Gisors. perhaps a link between the drowned past and the brotherhood sworn to remember it. And maybe that was the Templars' true search. Not Atlantis itself, but the echoes of those who fled it, survivors whose memories endured in myth, in symbol, in stories whispered across centuries. Sometimes the most powerful secrets aren't buried under the ocean. They're carried in the voices of people who never forgot. Now the scene shifts. You're standing inside a cathedral, Gothic, brooding, centuries deep. Stained glass spills red and gold across the dust. And in the shadowed corner of a stone arch, you notice a carving, a worn cross pate wrapped in curling vines. And hidden within the vines, bees. The bees matter. In certain esoteric circles, the bee is a symbol of the Merovingian bloodline, a dynasty of early Frankish kings believed, by fringe historians and Templar theorists, to rule not by divine right, but by inheritance from something far older, something that came before Christ, something that survived a flood. The story sounds impossible until you look at the Merovingians themselves. Tall, long-haired, strange rulers who claim descent from a sea-born creature. Most call it folklore, but to the Templars, it whispered of a hybrid lineage, descendants of Atlantis. According to these theories, the Templars didn't just protect relics, they protected blood. And not ordinary blood, Atlantean blood. A lineage preserved through marriage, cloister, and myth. The connections deepen. Several Templar commanderies in southern France were built on former Merovingian lands. Many sit atop older structures, crypts, stone circles, foundations no historian can confidently date. And their layouts echo Atlantean geometry, concentric rings, interlocked triangles, and golden ratios carved into stone. In the crypt of St. Dagobert's Chapel, named after a Merovingian king allegedly killed to end the bloodline, there's a half-destroyed mural. A man stands over a broken city drowned in blue waves. Above him, a star. Below him, a serpent. And beside him, a red cross hovering like memory. The Templars believed this lineage carried more than genetics. It carried memory, a race memory of Atlantis, dreams of geometry, instinct for the stars, the urge to build not by learning, but remembering. It is no coincidence that Rennes-le-Château, the heart of Grail theories and Merovingian legends, lies on the same Atlantean axis traced earlier. Its church, dedicated to Mary Magdalene, is filled with serpents in stone, strange Latin inscriptions, and mosaics hiding star patterns underfoot. Some say the Grail isn't a cup. It is a bloodline. And that bloodline isn't merely royal. It is Atlantean. The theory grows bolder. The Templars knew this, protected it, built their order to shield it from the church. And when Rome realized what they guarded, not just heresy, but a parallel genesis, the hammer fell. Because nothing threatens doctrine more than another origin story. One parchment from Languedoc, scorched and torn, speaks of star-born builders and those who remember the garden before Eden. Another attributed to a commander named Raymond de Castelnau ends with the chilling line, "What fell in the sea shall rise in the blood." The symbol beneath it shows a bee inside a triangle, inside a cross. If true, then Atlantis wasn't just a city. It was a blueprint, a seed, a world meant to be rebuilt in flesh, not stone. You're no longer in a library, but the air feels like one. Dust floats in beams of thin sunlight cutting through high windows. This chamber lies beneath a former Templar preceptory in Provence, silent for centuries. Hidden in a false alcove, scholars once found a parchment bound by hemp string. 12 pages, brittle and terrifying. They later called it the Book of the Secret Earth, not a book in the usual sense, a vision. Written in a cipher of Latin, Arabic, and an unknown script resembling early Iberian runes, the manuscript took decades to partially decode. What emerged wasn't history, it was revelation. It described a land beyond the horizon, surrounded by wind and flame, a place shaped like the eye of God, a fragment of the world torn away when mankind grew proud. A city, yes, but more, a world center, a place where the heavens once touched the ground, and its fate was not described as destruction, but exile. The manuscript called it Terra Subterranea, the hidden earth. Not a hollow earth, as later romantics imagined, but a forbidden geography. A realm displaced, locked away, waiting for a cycle to turn. And in its quiet coded lines, you hear the whisper again. Atlantis did not die. It withdrew. And those who remembered followed. The earth that was, the earth that should not be spoken of. That is what the manuscript hinted at. And the Templars, it suggested, were not explorers or rebels or mystics. They were the last bearers of a path that could no longer be walked, only remembered. Historians dismissed it as fantasy, or as a misread apocalypse written by an overwrought scribe, but several details refused to sit quietly. The pages describe the flow of mid-Atlantic currents with precision no medieval writer should have possessed. They reference the fracture of the Western Ridge, an uncanny description of the mid-Atlantic ridge itself. They speak of rising smoke beneath the waves, an image many believe hints at volcanic vents no European scholar would formally document for centuries. And woven through this strange knowledge are phrases familiar from older Templar fragments. Ringed throne, drowned memory, silent geometry. The Book of the Secret Earth did not invent these words. It collected them. It drew scattered whispers into a single cosmology where Atlantis was not a myth, but an origin. A place cast out not by nature, but by law, cosmic law. In this worldview, Earth is divided between the remembered and the forgotten. Atlantis, the hidden part, lies not simply underwater, but beneath centuries of fear, doctrine, and silence. The manuscript speaks of those who lived in the tower, the faithful who tried to preserve fragments of the lost geometry, in cathedrals, in fortresses, in mosaics shaped like echoes of the city that fell. And it warns, again and again, when memory fades, silence grows. And when silence blooms, the balance breaks once more. That line haunts scholars. It implies the fall of Atlantis was not a single tragedy, but a cycle, and that the Templars were keepers of recurrence, guardians of a rhythm older than Christianity itself. The book's final diagram only deepens the unease. A perfectly round island, 3 rings of land, 2 rings of water, a triangle at the center, and within that triangle, a spiral. Beside it, a line of tiny script, not to be found, only drawn, only followed. It does not name the place. It doesn't need to. The book was sealed in a Jesuit vault, its copies redacted to near uselessness, but those who saw it left with a single conviction. This was not a prophecy, nor a travel record. It was a reminder, geometry as memory, stone as scripture, silence as warning. And for the Templars, the secret earth was never behind them. It was beneath them, perhaps beneath us still. The year is 1308. Paris lies cold under a heavy sky. In stone chambers beneath the temple, dozens of men sit in chains, some broken, some burning with defiance. The Knights Templar, accused of crimes that blur the line between theology and nightmare. The Inquisitors demand simple confessions, devil worship, hidden idols, criminal rites, but scattered among the expected accusations are fragments that drift in another direction entirely. Testimonies about a journey, a place, something that sank. The most famous comes from Jean de Chalon. Under pressure, he admitted that more than 30 Templar galleys escaped La Rochelle before the arrests. That alone shook Europe. But in a nearly forgotten margin, badly translated and long overlooked, he mentioned a voyage, not to the east, but to where the sun dies, where God hid the first garden beneath, the waves. At the time, it was dismissed as delirium, but the phrasing is precise, repeated, rehearsed. And Jean was not alone. Hugues de Troyes told his inquisitors that some brothers guarded a knowledge from before the flood, and that they spoke often of the land that was swallowed. He refused to speak the name, said he had sworn never to say it aloud. He was executed soon after. Similar fragments appear again and again. The garden below the sea, the kingdom punished by water, the city of circles. Always couched in theological metaphors, but always pointing west. One friar tasked with copying these confessions wrote a private note in the margin. They do not speak in madness, but in fear. This knowledge is old, too old. The church, unsurprisingly, did not pursue these threads. They wanted heresy, not geography, idolatry, not memory. But a few inquisitors trained in astronomy and scripture noticed the pattern. The drowned city, the circular kingdom, the forbidden west. One Templar in Avignon broke under questioning and described a ritual honoring the drowned city. He spoke of a room with a floor of black and gold laid in concentric rings. A map drawn in ash that only those who fasted for 7 days could see. Madness, they said. Until years later, masons restoring the same commandery found a sealed chamber tiled in basalt and marble, arranged in perfect circles. It was quietly closed again. The strangest confession came from an elderly lay brother. Uneducated, terrified, shaking so badly the clerk could barely take his words. He said he once carried scrolls to a ship preparing to depart, in secret. When asked what was written on them, he whispered, "Instructions for remembering the place God drowned." His statement was erased from the official record, but the original parchment still exists, buried in private archives, stamped non-stabilis, unusable, unreliable, unwelcome. It becomes clear that the church wasn't just silencing heresy. They were silencing something older, not because they feared fantasy, but because fantasy sometimes looks too much like a memory no one wants. These dangerous testimonies, those touching lost lands, drowned cities, sacred geometry, never made it into the Chinon parchment, the Vatican document that secretly cleared the Templars of heresy. They were complications, loose threads, best forgotten. Yet they survive in margins, in discarded transcripts, in the final breath of dying men. One whispered, Atlantis was not a sin, it was a warning. Another said, we did not build the path, we remembered it. And the strangest of all, spoken moments before a knight was led to the stake. When the twin stars fall, it will rise again, not as land, but as memory. Whatever else the Templars were, they were not merely warriors or bankers. They were carriers of secrets too old to be taught and too dangerous to be proven. And in 1308, as torchlight flickered, over their final confessions, they may have told the world more than history was ever willing to hear. And now, inevitably, the trail leads to Rosslyn. Just outside Edinburgh, Rosslyn Chapel rises like a carved riddle in stone, a place where every arch, every shadowed corner, seems to hold its breath. Built in the mid-1400s, long after the Templars' fall, it was commissioned by William Sinclair, a man whose family was deeply woven into both Freemasonry and the lingering remnants of the order in Scotland. The chapel is Gothic, yes, but also something older, something encoded. At first glance, Rosslyn is beautiful. A forest of stone, ceilings carved with stars, walls draped in vines and angels. But look closer, and the carvings begin to shift. Strange plants appear. New World flora carved decades before Columbus sailed. Shapes resembling maize, aloe, even stylized cactus blooms, all impossible for 15th century Scotland, unless someone already knew. If you would like, I can continue this final Rosslyn segment in the same rich cinematic flow. They weren't searching for riches, and they weren't simply running from persecution, not at first. The deeper you follow their trail, the more you realize the Templars were pursuing something older than their order. Older than Christendom. Older even than the myths the Church allowed to survive. What emerges from the fragments they left behind is not a straight path, but a curved and deliberate geometry. A map made of memory rather than ink, spiraling across continents like an echo too old to die. That memory appears in vanished sea logs, sealed behind Vatican walls, in testimonies whispered under torture about a land God drowned, in carved stones found in places Europeans were never meant to reach, in symbols etched into chapel pillars and hidden chambers arranged in perfect concentric rings. It appears in the lost codex of Gizor, in the Book of the Secret Earth, in the Atlantean vault beneath Tomar, and in the sealed chamber below Rosslyn Chapel, each hinting not at fantasy, but at knowledge, a destination, a geometry, a story remembered rather than imagined. The Templars weren't looking for Atlantis like treasure hunters. They were following instructions left by those who fled it. Their architecture, octagonal towers, descending spiral staircases, wave-patterned floors, wasn't decorative. It was devotional, a reflection of a drowned city built in circles and governed by harmony. Even their initiation rites, built on silence, rebirth, and the crossing of unseen thresholds, mirrored the hermetic structure of a civilization said to have lived in alignment with cosmic law. And when you gather the testimonies, Jean de Chalon, speaking of galleys that escaped toward where the sun dies, Hugues de Troyes, insisting some brothers guarded knowledge from before the flood, the lay brother terrified as he whispered that he carried instructions for remembering the place God drowned. You begin to realize they were not speaking madness. They were speaking fear. Fear of revealing something too ancient, too forbidden, too incompatible with doctrine. Because Atlantis wasn't dangerous to the Church as a pagan myth. It was dangerous because it presented another Genesis, one not rooted in sin and salvation, but in cycles, geometry, and cosmic balance. And when the Vatican quietly removed files, sealed folios under review, denied access to maps, and buried incriminating testimonies, it was not to suppress fantasy, but to silence memory. Meanwhile, the missing Templar fleet, the one that vanished from La Rochelle, resurfaced only in rumors. Knights seen in Scotland, in Iceland, on islands of the Atlantic, in carvings along Mesoamerican coasts long before Columbus. Coincidence breaks under the weight of repetition. Their symbols, crosses inside triangles, 8-pointed stars, spirals mirroring Plato's description of Atlantis, appear where they should not be, carved in stone by hands that should never have met. And then, Portugal steps into the story. Prince Henry the Navigator, backed by the Order of Christ, essentially the Templars reborn, launched voyages that curiously matched older, forbidden charts. His sails bore the red cross, not of the crown, but of the Templar legacy. His ships drifted west when logic demanded they follow the coast. His cartographers drew islands before they were discovered. His architects carved spirals, knots, and geometric grids into the walls of Tomar that looked less like decoration and more like remembrance. And the islands, Madeira, the Azores, Nova Scotia, began to reveal terraced fields, stone cisterns, carved tunnels, crosses weathered by centuries, and inscriptions muttering, "The brothers fled, but the path remained." These sites form a curve across the ocean, a geometric arc identical to patterns found in Templar chapels across Europe. A map within land, pointing west, always west. This is the Atlantean coordinate hypothesis, that the Templars reconstructed the memory of a drowned civilization in stone, using Europe as a star chart, and the Atlantic islands as stepping stones. And then, the Piri race map appears, showing coasts no one had yet discovered, using sources said to come from those who worship the Red Cross, with marginal notes about the land of rings and kings drowned by fire and salt. Suddenly, you realize the Templars may not have been searching for Atlantis. They were remembering it, preserving it, guarding it. And when you stand inside Rosslyn Chapel, beneath stars carved before they should exist, above a sealed chamber never opened, surrounded by spirals matching Atlantean geometry, it becomes impossible to dismiss the possibility that what lies beneath is not treasure, but memory. A memory carried across oceans, across orders, across centuries. A memory the Church feared. A memory the Templars died protecting. A memory that whispers still, not as land, but as pattern. Not as ruins, but as recurrence. Not as a city to be found, but as a story the world was never meant to forget. The pattern that emerges is that of a mission sustained quietly across decades and generations. A mission to seek something believed to have existed in the deep past. Something not merely lost, but deliberately drowned. Not destroyed, but exiled. In Templar thought, Atlantis was never a golden utopia. It was a warning, a memory of sacred knowledge that thrived once and vanished when mankind grew too arrogant to honor it. And yet, they believed fragments of that wisdom survived, not only in texts, but in alignments, in echoes, in the geometry of the earth itself. Did they find it? Depends on what you mean by found. A sunken continent rising from the waves? Perhaps not. But traces of its memory carried eastward by survivors. Fragments of science encoded in ancient traditions. Lost wisdom hidden in stone, in architecture, in symbols only the initiated were trained to recognize, those they may have uncovered, preserved, and protected. Atlantis may never have been a single island. Perhaps it was a cycle, a fall, a memory they believed must never be erased. And in that sense, yes, they found its shadow. They followed its pulse. They gathered enough pieces that centuries later, we are still trying to finish their puzzle, still chasing their trail across the waters, still wondering what they saw just beyond the edge of the map. You can almost hear it, can't you? That hush that rises when the last page turns, when the candle gutters low, and the only thing left is an old map with curled edges and fading ink. Lines stretching not merely across oceans, but across centuries. The Templars never spoke openly of Atlantis. They didn't carve the word in stone or proclaim it from battlements. Their silence was curated, purposeful, woven into cryptic inscriptions, mirrored chapels, concentric vaults, and impossible geometries, visible only from above. It was a silence louder than any declaration. A silence that doesn't hide, but waits. The question we asked, whether they sought Atlantis, is one the Order never answered outright. But maybe they didn't need to. The evidence speaks for them. The fleets that vanished deliberately, the encoded echoes found in places they should never have reached, the whispered phrases of dying knights who spoke of drowned kingdoms and forbidden gardens. When belief is this consistent, this encrypted, and this costly, it tells you something profound. Someone was protecting a truth, or protecting others from it. Tonight we wandered through castles and crypts, through storm-torn harbors and abandoned chapels, beneath stone vaults carved with symbols older than doctrine. We listened for the gaps in the record, the fragments in the myth, the patterns in the dust. And perhaps, without realizing it, you noticed what truly compelled you. It wasn't certainty. It was the silence, the kind of silence that lingers between coordinates, between forgotten testimonies, between centuries. And as the final echo of Templar footsteps dies into the stone, you're left wondering whether they found peace, or whether their mission, the mission to remember what the world forgot, is still waiting for someone else to finish. Someone like you. So rest now. Let the sea grow quiet again. Let the stars realign over maps no longer drawn. And if, in dreams, you find yourself sailing west beyond the Pillars of Hercules, into mists, no chart records, you'll understand why. Because tonight, you heard their silence too.